As a historian, I would interpret the start of systemic discrimination being slavery and there being no real end to systemic discrimination. Over the years, there have been many ways to combat the problem, such as the 13th Amendment and the Civil Rights Movement, to now where there are more public awareness campaigns and diversity programs that people can take to kind of learn more about it. However, all of these attempts have kind of not worked out, although their ideas were good. Yes, the 13th Amendment was meant to abolish the act of slavery conditionally, but only from that came black codes and the Jim Crow laws, continuing that segregation and continuing systemic discrimination and actually building it into the fabric of the United States economy, into the way of their thinking, and into the way of life. These black codes and the Jim Crow laws
created a lot of barriers for black people, which made it harder for them to get ahead in different aspects of their life, and it was kind of a continuous reminder of the past and the fact that they were viewed as second-class citizens. My essay topic is extremely relevant in a modern day audience. I spent 3 weeks researching the origins of systemic discrimination and what kind of built it up over the years, as well as why things that happened hundreds of years ago are still visible with long-lasting effects in today's society. This is an important topic to care about just because we cannot move forward the US society and break away from those inequalities until we look at the past and change what needs to be changed and make these systematic changes to things such as the economy, like the school systems and the legal system. All of these are kind of stacked against African American people because of the past. We need to take more care in thinking about these past events to move forward with the betterment of the United States, with the more equality standpoint and view.
An event that we talked about, though less so, that resonated with me and that I found important was the publishing of Uncle Tom's Cabin. And I think this is like a very important moment in the terms of cause and consequence, because the reason for this woman releasing this book was to depict the cruelty and the dehumanizing acts that African Americans were subjected to, that both the North didn't realize and the South didn't want other people to realize, and it getting out. This was a very important change for the movement towards a civil war for the North, because now that they knew what was going on in the South, and now that they knew that the South knew that what they were doing was wrong, it made the North more infuriated and more willing to go and fight for the rights of these African Americans, because they believed that what was happening to them was completely The next event that I want to discuss is Martin Luther King's I Had a Dream speech. He made this speech to address the growing economic and employment inequalities that were kind of facing America, and he wanted to bring awareness to how these were having like long-lasting effects on the African American community, and how it was kind of making it much harder for African Americans to have better lives, to be out of poverty, to get good educations, and kind of what all of this was impacting. After this speech, there was a lot more traction in the passing of the Civil Rights Act as well as the Voting Act, which were basically just both giving African American people more rights and more freedoms, and kind of taking another step into making them feel more equal in that society. The first event that I picked was the causes of the Civil War. This was a defining moment for the United States. The most significant change that we saw leading up to the Civil War was the divide between the North and the South and the growing hatred for each other based on their views of slavery. The North was leading towards wanting to abolish slavery and had almost completely abolished it, to become increasingly more independent, while the South strongly believed in it and wanted to continue it in its economic system, in its future, and believed that it was the proper way of doing things. Something that has kind of remained the same is the institutionalized discrimination towards African American people from the South side, and just the idea that they are still second-class citizens and that they are not seen as equal to white people. The second event that I want to analyze through the lens of changing continuity are the Salem witch trials. The Salem witch trials were basically like a series of trials that prosecuted people for being accused of being witches. And there's kind of no real winning. Like, you would be given a task, and if you survived the task, you were a witch and you had to die. But if you died from the task, you weren't a witch and they just kind of honored you, which, to be honest, I would not want that. That sounds horrible. The most significant observable change leading up to the Salem witch trials was kind of the Puritans' like stance on religion. It was prevalent in the society, like in when the Salem witch trials were happening, but leading up more towards the trial, had become very entrenched in the idea, and the values were very evident of the Salem witch trial, and they were taken very seriously by Puritans, and anything that they perceived to be a threat to their way of life was immediately stopped. The thing that kind of remained the same throughout the witch trials was the treatment of women and their role in the society. Women were kind of seen as like the target because they were most vulnerable to the sorts of things that were being looked for during the Salem witch trial, and the prosecution of women during the Salem witch trials was much higher and much more common than the prosecution of men, because they were believed to be more of the witches. Women were also expected to follow these extremely strict guidelines that were set by men so that they wouldn't be perceived as a witch and then hung or sentenced to death in some sort of other gruesome way. It kind of goes back to the inequalities that women have faced regarding societies with men and not being equal and not being seen as an equal. Personally, I think the turning point for American history was the start of slavery, like the very beginning, when somebody decided that it would be a good idea to work humans till practically death for hundreds and hundreds of years. From that one act has paved the way for years and years and years of systemic discrimination. Slavery really got the ball rolling for everything that has happened to Black people, is what I'm trying to say. Slavery went to the 13th Amendment, which then brought up Black codes and Jim Crow laws, leading to mass incarceration and redlining, and the leading up all the way to the wage gap. And all of these are kind of entangled in each other, and they all result from the central idea of slavery, and the idea that Black people should not be receiving the same liberties that white people do. And that, I believe, was the most important and most evident turning point in the United States.